You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. Andrew Vaughn is hitting the ball recently. That's kind of exciting. Jonathan Cannon had a great start, and then the bullpen blew it. And I am in love with Drew Thorpe. Those are my initial thoughts as we kick off this show, Ed.
And those are all very, very valid thoughts. Andrew Vaughn he's like the 17-year cicadas. I think he just makes an appearance every once in a while.
Which, by the way, aren't we lucky those things aren't venomous and they don't have stingers? I was thinking that on the golf course this week. I just kept thinking as they kept landing on me as I was shooting very poorly, thank God these things don't have stingers.
Yeah, that's also that's a good thing too. I mean, I think it's the way people view the White Sox. Like, thank God these guys don't have actual bats.
Well, that's the thing. Like, look, they have the pitching. I'm convinced of it. I look at Drew Thorpe. I look at even Nastrini struggling. If he ends up being a fifth starter or a guy out of the bullpen, he's going to pitch in the majors, and he's going to be a piece that you don't have to spend a lot of money on for the next couple of years. Cannon is probably a fifth or fourth starter, but he's going to be consistent. But if this is what I'm going to get from Drew Thorpe, and then we've got guys like Kai Busch still sitting down there.
Noah Schultz
sitting down there, and you're going to have a couple more years of Crochet, which is, again, why you don't get rid of him. You could have a pretty damn good staff next year, and definitely in 2026, a dominant staff that could be here. And it's not going to cost you very much of anything. And yeah, you might need a supplement by going out and getting a pitcher here or there, but there's Eric Fetties every year if you're good at identifying them. I really believe in what Brian Bannister is doing. Like, that's the thing. James Fox said it on the show last week, and he covers all the minor league stuff, and he made a great point. I kept waiting for them to hire a Brian Bannister type for the hitting side, because I have all the confidence in the world in the pitching development. And Katz is not what's developing it. It's Bannister, his theories, his philosophies, how he did things before. He had a track record where he came from. He now has these young kids, and that was the right thing to do to bring Thorpe from AA to the majors. He didn't need to go to AAA and be in the bandbox in Charlotte. He walked right in, and he would have just given up one run in that game if it weren't for poor defense. He would have gone 5 innings with 1 run, multiple strikeouts. He's got a strut when he comes off the mound. I'm like, that guy's a dude.
And honestly, I say this with all the respect in the world for Dylan Cease's facial hair, Drew Thorpe rocks the mustache much better.
I think he may be better than Cease in the long run, too.
Well, and that's an entirely possible thing.
Watching Drew Thorpe pitch that night was the most positive moment of my season. Now, as a White Sox fan, I fully expect his arm to land halfway between the pitcher's mound and home plate sometime in his next 3 starts, because that's what happens to us, right? But, like, at this moment, I have just this unabashed hope watching him pitch, and then watching how Cannon adjusted and had a really nice start, and looking at what's going on in the minor leagues. Look, I don't think a lot of these guys in AA are going to AAA. Like Noah Schultz, that may be his last stop, is AA. I'm not saying he's up this year, but he's not as far away, because I don't think they want to put anybody in AAA who they actually believe in. Because why are you going to send somebody there to just get beat up? Get him to the majors, bring him in with confidence, and let him look how Thorpe looked. That guy had no fear. And that's what I want. If this is what the plan is, I'm excited about it. This is the kind of thing, as a White Sox fan, that makes me happy, even in a bad season. Like, Sox fans are angry. We're disappointed. We know who the owner is. We can't understand why Pedro's still managing the team. Everybody pretty much has the same opinion, right? Like, we might have slightly different opinions, but we're all pretty much the same baseball fan. I could tell that sitting at the bar at Cork and Carry at the park this past weekend. 33rd and Princeton, shadow of the ballpark, the official home of Sox in the Basement, the place for you to go pregame. Bring the whole family in. I was at the bar. I'm talking to a couple of guys at the corner of that bar, and we're just watching another baseball game before the Sox game. And we're just talking the philosophies of baseball, and I had never met him before. And these are the kind of things that real baseball fans, that fans like you and me and everybody listening, these are the things that you get excited about, watching a young guy like Drew Thorpe go out there and pitch. That's why I still like going to Cork and talking baseball, win or lose. The food's great. I talked about the Buffalo chicken egg rolls, and I love them. The beer selection's incredible. Big, beautiful bar, outdoor seating, indoor seating, bring the whole family before the game, get over there afterwards for the party. See more at corkandcarry.com. But his start, I needed that. I don't know where the hitting comes from, right? And you definitely have to get rid of this mope who's the manager. Andrew Benintendi's the spark you needed at the end of that game the other night. You decide to pinch hit for him when Luis Robert Jr. ties it up in the 9th inning with a home run on the first pitch. And now you need a hit with a guy on third. And you go, I'm going to go with the guy that's hitting under 200. It's done nothing all year.
Hasn't had a major league at bat in weeks because he's been on the IL.
Yeah, that guy's got more hunches than any manager I've ever watched in Major League Baseball. And the thing with hunches is sometimes you're right. Like Ozzie Guillen had a hunch in Game 3 of the World Series in 2005. All right? He looked at Blum and he goes, I think he can get something here. And he laughed about it. It actually was his kids. I think he credits them. Like he was going to have...
Right, yeah, that's right.
Right, he was going to have... who did he have? He had a couple guys on that team that were like role players. He was going with somebody else. That's what I remember.
He had Willie Harris, he had Timo Perez,
He was going with somebody else, and the kids were like, Blummer's like from here. Like if you want a moment, this is the guy. And it's so late in the game, he goes, yeah, sure. Those instincts are better than any instincts Pedro has ever had. He's got no instincts. He's like, I think he's due. If Pedro says he's due, not due.
No, not due. He's not even overdue. He's not even been billed yet. There's nothing due about this person. No, hunches are great in certain moments at certain times, right? But then you can hunch your way into a lot of trouble as well. And that's what Pedro does. If he's just following his hunches constantly, there's not a whole hell of a lot of difference between I got a hunch and I'm second guessing literally everything I'm doing because I have no idea what I'm doing. So the slope is not very far there. Well,
he's got one ally, and that's Bruce Levine, who has always been a water carrier for those that are around the organization because they give him information and they keep Bruce around. And so Scott Greger, another guy who's in that press corps, right? Scott Greger, Daily Herald, he's been on this show before. He tweets out, it's been so obvious for so long. If the White Sox want to right their many wrongs, dump Pedro Grifol and bring back Ozzie Guillen. And he tweeted this after the evening on the postgame, I believe it was postgame, where Ozzie Guillen, who clearly is communicating to everybody that he wants this job. Like Ozzie wants to step in there and take over.
He can't wait to take over.
Right. We talked about how they should do it. And the entire Guillen group liked all the shows. We got some followers from people with the last name of Guillen. Ozzie was tagged in the thing when they commented on it. He wants to manage the team. He wants to manage the team. He just is waiting for them to do it, and somebody won't let him do it, but he wants to do it. So if they're not going to let him do it, he's going to mock it. So what does he do? He goes, I'm embarrassed. And then Chuckster goes, well, why are you embarrassed? And Ozzie goes, well, I mean, I must be really bad if I wasn't good enough to manage this team.
Right. I mean,
what's wrong with me? And he starts doing that. And I love that he's doing it. And then Greger puts out the tweet and Bruce immediately goes, maybe start with better players, which is saying that it's not Pedro's fault. He has no impact on some of these losses. And sure, they wouldn't be a winning team, but they wouldn't be the worst team in history. There's a big gaping chasm between those two things. And the manager has something to do with that, with his lineups, with his decision making, with the way he runs the team, with the way that he's lost the locker room. There's so many different ways that it's been shown that players in the locker room might not respect this guy that much, based on quotes and the way that they react to things and the flat comments and everything else like that. And then I thought it was funny that the @Guillen's World account immediately went right back at Bruce. And I don't know if it'd be any good. I don't know what it would do. I just think it'd be interesting. I think it'd be fun. Right now, I think the post game's more fun than the game because Ozzie's talking, right? I would love him in the dugout for the second half. I don't expect him to be the long-term manager, right? I don't think Ozzie wants to be the long-term 10-year manager of the Chicago White Sox. He just wants to step in there right now and deal with the stuff that he's watching. He's like a fan. He's like me. I sit around and dream about the idea that somehow one day I will be put in control of this team so I can fire all of the terrible in the building and change everything, right? That will never happen. Ozzie looks at it like, I would just like to get in there like Ari Gold in that episode of Entourage where he walks in with a paint gun and lay waste to the garbage surrounding this team that I've been watching for the last couple of years. And I have the credentials to do it. And then I'll go off into the sunset and you hire your long-term manager. Like, that's how I think he thinks, and I'm all for it, Ed.
Well, yeah, and you know, to kind of shoot back at Bruce, you sit there and you go, okay, so get better players. Well, fine. So it's so darn easy to manage a team when you have a team of all-stars. But guess what Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams kept selling us on every single year? We're assembling a super team. We're assembling a super team. All these guys are high-end talent. And you know, look at the talent we have up and down the roster. So the manager doesn't matter. So you're carrying that water still for the organization. That's a huge problem because the rest of Major League Baseball doesn't have super teams. They might have one or two superstars, which the White Sox have at least one in Luis Robert Jr. when he's healthy, and he's showing that he's coming back and he's healthy. And then they have a supporting cast, okay? And those supporting players are guys that range from useful like Paul DeYoung, okay, or useful like Corey Julks and Corey Lee, the two Coreys. We got two Coreys. I like that.
Yeah, we got the two Coreys.
We got the two Coreys.
It's like the 80s. We got the two Coreys.
And then, just like the 80s, you got a couple of Andrews that don't do anything for you. And
oh, man. If you're from our generation, you laughed at that. Everybody else did. But that was some 80s pop trivia right there. That was brilliant.
Exactly.
I love it.
Exactly. Thank you. But you have guys that, you know, need to be put in positions to succeed and need to be taken out of positions where they're not going to succeed. And getting back to, like, for example, putting Andrew Benintendi kind of cold into a game, into a high-pressure situation. I understand he's a veteran. I know he's been there before. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the right moment right now to follow that particular hunch. So, yeah, a manager like Ozzie who has shown that he has good in-game instincts, a manager like Ozzie who has shown that he is willing to create an air of accountability around his dugout, okay, and is willing to throw players under the bus when they deserve to be under a bus, and sometimes when they don't even, but, you know, he's willing to create a culture in there that is certainly lacking. He's willing to hold players accountable. He is willing to put guys in positions where they can succeed and you pull the right levers and push the right buttons on these guys to get what he can out of them. And he does have that track record. No, I'm sorry. That would be an improvement over this team. It really would be. You don't need to have a team of really, really good players to play decent, watchable baseball. You can have a team of really, really good players and have them suck on the field too. And now you have a situation where you have a team of mediocre players with a couple of decent players here and there, and they're absolutely unwatchable and historically terrible. And it really does have to do with what goes on in the dugout and who's calling the shots and who's managing the team. And you can't throw that all on Chris Getz to sit there and say, go and buy a better team. Because he's not going to be allowed to do it. We know he's not going to be allowed to do it, at least not while Jerry's in charge.
Sox in the Basement listeners, switch to a new age of life with Hyatt Home Medical Equipment. You may not be ready to do so, but mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, you might be thinking about assisted living. Keep them out of there. Make it so they can get around on their own and live independently. If you're getting older and you're thinking to yourself, how can I make my life easier in my home? Stair lifts, ramps, grab bars, lift chairs, even bathroom remodeling, all at Hyatt Home Medical Equipment. They work with your insurance. You might not know this, but a lot of this is insured and they have 0% financing for qualified individuals. If you use a CPAP machine, I know so many people who use them, and you're unhappy with your vendor, switch and get supplies directly mailed to you, plus test it all out in their showroom. And they have the latest and greatest in continuous glucose monitors. Learn more about Hyatt Home Medical Equipment at hhme.com. Sitting down here at the 9-foot homemade oak bar, Steve Paradzinski from On Tap Sportsnet. A much longer version of this interview will be available on Monday. Video from down here at the bar. The cameras are on us. We look beautiful. Much like a Twitter nemesis of Steve Paradzinski, who loves to take shots from time to time at Bob Nightingale, which I love. Bob was on the corporate podcast. You can already see it happening. He's down there in a basement just like you are, in a suit, unlike you, telling us all about the haul we're going to get for Luis Robert Jr.
Listen, I was doing my day job up in Kenosha, Wisconsin earlier today. I didn't bring my sport coat with me. I feel a little bit underdressed. # confirmed, Bob. I guess I missed the memo on that one. But
you would have showed up in a sport coat, I'd have been concerned.
Who does that? Come on.
But anyway, him showing up on that show, talk about what the Sox would get for Luis Robert Jr. scares the hell out of me, because I don't want him to move on from him. Like, they're already pushing a narrative. Like, you could see it slowly leaking out. Well, he's not always available. Well, we'd be lucky if we might get a bigger haul than Soto. Like, all this stuff. And I sit there and I go, we have him after this year for 3 years. It goes to the adage that I've heard repeated and seen repeated so many times by White Sox fans over the last couple of weeks. Maybe we can trade Luis Robert Jr. for a prospect that may turn in one day to Luis Robert Jr. I don't want to do that. Do you?
I don't either. And
does that crush you as a fan if that happens?
I don't know that it will crush me. I feel like I'm so numb to things at this point, and that's not necessarily a good place to be, if we're being totally honest. But, one of the things that I wrote about over the course of the winter, and this was shortly after the Dylan Cease trade, when everybody's like, oh, you might as well just trade Robert now, just get it over with. My thought process has not changed on it, and it's this. They have 13 months to get this thing on track. If some of the prospects start to develop, if Chris Getz is better at identifying talent in that mid-tier to be able to try to piece some things together to where if he thinks you can be one of the 6 playoff teams in 2026, you hold on to Luis Robert and you have 2 shots at this thing. We saw what the Arizona Diamondbacks did.
Yeah. Going
from 110 losses and then 2 years later in the World Series. Am I expecting that? No. But if you think you can be one of those 6 teams in 2026, you hold on to Luis Robert, you take your shot twice trying to get hot in the month of October.
Exactly, because you know what? You're not going to find a Luis Robert Jr. for $20 million a year in those years available on the open market to go add to your team. So that's the thing. Even if all of your prospects become good, you're still going to need.
We've lived through that.
But we've lived through that, right? So now we get to the point where all the prospects are good, right? The problem that's going to arise is going to be the same problem you had when Machado and Harper didn't sign. You don't have the difference maker because you got rid of him and you moved on from him, and you could have had him for 2 years and $20 million during 26 and 27. And that's the problem with trading him away. It's the same reason why I wouldn't move Crochet.
Yeah, and that's one of the points of contention that I've had with people on the Crochet debate about trading him. So the way I look at it is this. He's pitching like an ace right now, minus those 3 starts that he had in late April and early May. If you take those out, and I know you can't take them out, but if you take those out, he is pitching like one of the best pitchers in baseball. He's 24 years old, and because of the fact that he has been a reliever that has not accrued saves, he is not going to get a lot of money in arbitration. So if Brian Bannister and the rest of your pitching hierarchy, if they believe that he can hold up as a starter, you absolutely should be having the conversations about tacking on additional years to this.
Now, for Crochet, you wrote an article recently talking about his change in his pitch mix.
Yeah.
I would imagine that we credit Martin Maldonado completely for this because that's why he's on the field as much as he is. Am I wrong about that?
Don't forget to hashtag vote Maldi. and unironically mentioned it on the broadcast.
If only this team had enough people paying attention that they could actually push him into the game. That's the problem. No matter how many people try to do it, he's not getting in the game. But it's funny that Sox fans are doing it.
See, I don't know. This is the fan base that got AJ Paradzinski voted into an All-Star game.
That is true.
So if they can get that guy voted in, and that was a year after they got Scott Podsednik voted in. I mean, Sox fans have been able to win the final vote 3 separate times. You put our backs against the wall.
We'll find a way.
We will find a way.
Push him through.
So it would be hilarious, but knowing Rob Manfred and all the nonsense that goes
Jerry
along
would make a
with
phone call right away.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's like, they're embarrassing me. You got to take care of this.
Exactly. Which is what makes it that much better. But on a serious note.
What's the mix, though? What did he do different?
The thing that he did, so in the April 13th start against Cincinnati, there was a point where he was fastball slider being his secondary pitch. That April 13th start, the slider and the cutter intersected with each other. And since then, the cutter has served as the primary secondary offering.
That's so Don Cooper.
It really is. We're kind of seeing things going cyclical here, and the cutter kind of coming back into vogue a little bit because we see that with him. We saw it with Drew Thorpe last night.
We did. You're right about that. I mean, like, and that's the thing. Like, this was a team that preached the cutter years ago.
I used to joke all the time that the Don Cooper, school of pitching was, all right, come in here, stand tall, throw the cutter, get inside, stay over the rubber, let's go.
Yeah.
But we're seeing.
And Mark Burley made a whole career out of it.
He did. Do we want to talk about what he said in the booth the other night?
Oh, that was brilliant.
You want to talk about getting my blood boiling, but we'll circle back to that.
Yeah, we'll circle back to it. But what he did is he started throwing more cutters.
Yeah. So the cutter has really become his primary, secondary offering. And even in a number of starts here, he's actually had the changeup outpace his slider usage in it. So I don't know if it's just Bannister and Katz kind of getting together, looking at some of the data here and saying, hey, this cutter here, if you play it off of the four-seam fastball, you got the four-seam fastball at the top of the zone, you got a cutter boring in on the hands of the right-handed hitters, a changeup kind of down and away to righties. So pairing that with the four-seamer, kind of same movement profile, changing eye levels here, and then the cutter and the slider in on the hands of righties here, the slider having a little bit sharper depth to it versus the cutter. And it's just worked tremendously from that aspect.
And at that point, you're a hitter, and you can't tell what's coming halfway to the plate.
Exactly. Now you've got different seeds of doubt in your mind, whereas before he's just, okay, it's fastball slider, especially as a reliever. That's all he was featuring. Now you've got, okay, he's got this cutter, and there's enough of a variance there. The velocity band, which these three pitches are really featuring, there's about a 6 mile an hour velocity difference from the fastball to the cutter to the slider right there. So you've got enough of a velocity difference right there to keep hitters off balance, and the shape of the pitches there with the slider and the cutter, the slider obviously being sharper on the breaking aspect of it, it's just causing all kinds of problems for hitters trying to get the barrel on the baseball. And then, by the way, now you got to worry and you got to think about 98 at the top of the zone.
Yes, exactly. As we talk with Steve Paradzinski of OnTap Sportsnet, just a reminder, when you combine State Farm home and auto insurance, you save an average of $889. State Farm agent John Harrell is ready to help you combine home and auto and save in Chicagoland. Call him today, 708-481-4500. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Average annual per household savings based on a 2019 national survey by State Farm of new policyholders who reported savings by switching to State Farm. In the middle of a bad season, where you're angry about everything that's happening with it and how the team's being run from the top on down, again, you look at how the pitching's being run, and that addresses the reason they probably lose to the Astros a few years ago, the reason why teams were able to jump all over them, the reason why it was probably a 500 season the next year because the book was out on them, that they had a bunch of throwers and no pitchers. Mm-hmm. And Garret Crochet has been turned into a pitcher, if what you're saying is true. I mean, and Fetty is clearly a pitcher. Yep. He's not a thrower. He's a pitcher. Drew Thorpe looked like a pitcher when I saw him. And that's the difference. There's more pitchers than throwers. And I know that's something that I think a lot of people have been watching this team for the last couple of years have yelled about, that they need more actual pitchers, because teams would look at them in a series and be like, well, it's three of the same guy. Mm-hmm. So we just got to figure this out, and we're going to get all three of them throw the same thing. They all do the same. They're all trying to overpower me. Rodon gets pissed off. He's just going to throw it as fast as he can down the middle, right? And now it's a different philosophy. The pitching coach didn't change. So that's, again, why you look at Brian Bannister and say that's the one thing that he's probably the most positive thing that I've seen in the last 12 months.
100%. And if you go back and if you look at Bannister's time with the San Francisco Giants, you look at some of the guys that they brought in, Carlos Rodon coming in that 2022 season, piggybacking off of the success he had in 2021, that last year with the Sox, and he parlayed that into a 9-figure deal with the New York Yankees. You look at the success that Sean Manaea had in San Francisco, guys like Alex Wood, guys that weren't necessarily household names, and
guys that I won fantasy leagues with because I was like, well, I can get them late in a draft, and I know who's developing them. Like once they were on the Giants, I was like, well, they're going to do something better than their numbers were the year before.
And there was a 3-year period when Bannister was there, when the Giants actually, I think, ranked second in all of baseball in fewest walks per 9. What is the one thing that is just killing this team? And I harp on this every night, because they just go out there and they issue so many free passes, and it drives me absolutely insane. So if Bannister is able to do that kind of organizationally, and you look at the success that is being had by the rotation down in Birmingham in particular. And there's a lot of helium around those guys right now for the success that they're having. But a lot of them are throwing strikes more consistently here. And that's something that this team, organizationally, from top to bottom, needs to get back to, because the walks have just gotten so out of control over the last 5 to 6 years that it's just driving me crazy.
And let's be honest, you only need 3 of those guys.
Yeah.
3 of those guys come up from AA. And you have a great stat. If they actually work, if 3 of them pan out, then you're golden, because you can fill in, and if you keep Crochet around, all of a sudden now you have a major league pitching staff that's going to be in the higher end in Major League Baseball if just some of them work out. And then you have the money to spend on position players. So again, I think you've said it. James Fox said it on the last show. You're waiting for the Brian Bannister of the hitting side.
Yeah.
Because that's what needs to be done. And a new manager. You need a new manager. And you need the owner to die. But then, we'll start with the positives.
Baby steps.
A reminder that Sox in the Basement is on YouTube. We've been on there for a while with just audio podcasts, so you might be listening right now through YouTube. But now we have video pods that are coming out on Mondays, most of the time on Mondays. It's not going to be as consistent probably as this show, which comes out twice a week. All of it brought to you by Cork and Carry at the Park. You know that. But the extended version of the interview with Steve Paradzinski, we get into a lot of fun. We really do. We start making fun of Jerry Reinsdorf. We start making fun of a lot of things. And we start kind of getting into the weeds on some White Sox fandom angst. And we talk a little bit more about Garret Crochet and a lot more about Brian Bannister. That extended version video-wise up on YouTube on Monday. Subscribe to the Sox in the Basement channel for free. The link to it is right there at soxinthebasement.com, or just go to YouTube and search Sox in the Basement. That said, we're going to wrap up the show with our good friend, the Sox Nerd, now.
And the Sox Nerd is brought to you by the Village of Lamont. Want to experience a downtown with real history, great eats and drinks, and green spaces filled with adventures? Well, then visit the Village of Lamont this summer as you're getting outside. Shop, dine, drink, explore, and check out their website for all the latest info, everything that's going on down there. Visit LamontDowntown.com. Nerd, what do you got for us?
Ed, let's talk Major League debuts. The White Sox latest unveiling went really well. Hot prospect Drew Thorpe's performance on June 11th was something we all needed. The right-hander gave up 1 earned run on 3 hits with 2 walks and 4 strikeouts in 5 innings, but received a no decision in Seattle. That performance provided us with a sliver of hope in this dark year. Counting Thorpe's outing, White Sox pitchers debuting as starters this season, that also includes Jonathan Cannon and Nick Nastrini, combined for a 2.40 ERA in their debuts. This has continued a trend of solid starts by debuting Sox starting pitchers. While only Dylan Cease won his Major League debut as a starter since 2016, the stats in those games have been pretty good. The last 9 White Sox starters making their Major League debut have posted a 2.90 ERA in those assignments. The last clunker by a Sox twirler in his Major League debut as a starter was when Chris Beck was tagged for 4 runs on 10 hits in 6 innings at Baltimore in 2015. Debuts can be special, as witnessed by the electricity in the park when Cease debuted in 2016 and Michael Kopech debuted 2 years prior. I witnessed the Major League debut of Frank Thomas in 1990 in Milwaukee. That debut was special not because Big Frank drove in the winning run that night, but because he looked like no other White Sox player I had ever seen. Even in his first Major League game, Frank looked like a man among boys, a pattern he continued throughout his Hall of Fame career. The most spectacular debut I ever witnessed was at the Sox current home, but not by a Sox player. On June 21st, 1991, 19-year-old Ivan Rodriguez, married hours before in Tulsa, where he was playing in AA, easily threw out Joey Cora and Warren Newson trying to steal, and then he drove in 2 insurance runs in the 9th inning of Texas's 9-3 win. Before I get to my zinger, a reminder, you can access my blog at soxinthebasement.com, and there is plenty of Sox Nerd material on Twitter and on the scoreboard at Guaranteed Rate Field. My zinger, in Thursday's win at Seattle, the White Sox ended an 11-game losing streak where they strike out at least 15 batters in a game. Garret Crochet, Kopech, and Tanner Banks combined for 19 strikeouts in the Sox' first win in a 15-plus strikeout game since September 30th, 2022. That's it, Ed. More than you probably wanted to know about debuts, Thorpe, Frank Thomas, and losses in Big K games.
Well, no, I wanted to know about all that stuff except for the high strikeout losing streak. That's a pretty depressing stat.
But they won last night.
That's true. That's true they did. We'll take it where we can get it this year.
Sounds good. All right, thanks, Ed. We'll chat soon.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.